All right, ma'am, party's over. Manager says you're trespassing. You need to leave.
I'm a paying customer.
I haven't done what you did. Get up!
I was sitting in a bookstore cafe, reading case files on my tablet, when the manager told me I had to leave. Not because I'd done anything wrong. Not because I was causing a disturbance. But because someone had decided I didn't belong there. My name is Special Agent Tasha Wilmont, and I've spent 19 years with the DEA. I've taken down international drug trafficking organizations. I've coordinated multi-agency operations across 4 countries. I've testified in federal court more times than I can count. But none of that mattered to the police officer who handcuffed me in front of 50 people for the crime of drinking tea while black. It was a Wednesday morning in November. I remember because it was the day before Thanksgiving, and downtown Portland was already decorated for the holidays. String lights crisscrossed above the streets. Storefront windows displayed seasonal merchandise. The air was cold and crisp, carrying the smell of rain that hadn't quite fallen yet. I'd taken a rare morning off. My supervisor had actually ordered me to take it, pointing out that I'd worked 16 consecutive days without a break. I had a meeting scheduled for 11 with a confidential informant, someone who'd reached out with information about a fentanyl distribution network we'd been tracking for 8 months. But that meeting wasn't until 11, and it was only 9:30. So I decided to do something I rarely did. Relax. Have tea. Read. Be a normal person for 90 minutes. Riverside Books and Cafe occupied a converted warehouse space in the Pearl District. High ceilings with exposed beams. Brick walls lined with bookshelves. A small cafe counter in the back that served coffee, tea, and pastries. Scattered throughout were mismatched armchairs, small tables, and reading nooks. It was the kind of place that invited you to settle in and stay a while. I arrived at 9:15, ordered a large chamomile tea and a blueberry scone, paid with my credit card, and found a comfortable armchair near the fiction section. I pulled out my tablet and opened the case files I needed to review before my meeting. Evidence logs. Witness statements. Surveillance reports. Nothing classified, just the routine documentation that fills a federal agent's day. I was dressed casually. Dark jeans. A navy sweater. Ankle boots. My hair was pulled back in a low ponytail. I looked exactly like dozens of other customers in that bookstore. Professional women taking a morning break. Students studying between classes. Remote workers claiming a cozy spot for a few hours. My DEA credentials were in my crossbody bag. My service weapon was locked in the gun safe in my car. I carried off duty sometimes, but not when I was deliberately trying to have a peaceful morning. Looking back, I wish I had. Not because I would have used it, but because having it visible might have changed what happened next. I'd been sitting there for maybe 30 minutes when I first noticed him watching me. The manager. White male, probably late 20s, with carefully styled hair and black-framed glasses. He wore dark jeans and a fitted button-down shirt with the bookstore logo embroidered on the pocket. His name tag read Garrett. He was standing near the cafe counter, but his attention wasn't on the customers ordering drinks. He was looking at me. Studying me. His expression was hard to read, but something about it made my instincts prickle. I've spent nearly 2 decades learning to read people, to notice when someone's interest is more than casual. This was more than casual. I returned my attention to my tablet. Maybe I was being paranoid. Maybe he was just zoning out and happened to be looking in my direction. 10 minutes later, I glanced up again. He was still watching. And now he was talking to another employee, a young woman with purple hair, and both of them were looking at me. The woman shook her head at something he said. She looked uncomfortable. He insisted on something, gesturing toward me. She walked away, shaking her head again. My professional instincts were fully engaged now. Something was happening. Something that involved me. I cataloged the details automatically. Time. Approximately 9:55. Location, southeast corner of the bookstore, fiction section, 3rd row of shelving. Witnesses, approximately 40 to 50 customers scattered throughout the space. Security, I'd noticed cameras near the entrance and above the cash register. Garrett walked toward me. His posture was stiff. His jaw was set. He was trying to project authority, but underneath it, I could see nervousness. He stopped about 6 feet from my chair. "Excuse me, ma'am." I looked up. Kept my expression neutral and friendly. "Yes? I'm going to need you to leave." The words hung in the air between us. For a moment, I thought I'd misheard. "I'm sorry, what?" "You need to leave the premises. Now." I set my tablet down carefully. "Can I ask why?" "You're making other customers uncomfortable." I looked around. The nearest customers were 2 women about 15 feet away, deeply engrossed in a conversation about a book one of them was holding. Beyond them, a man with headphones was typing on a laptop. No one was paying any attention to me at all. "I'm making people uncomfortable," I repeated. "By sitting in a chair reading? You've been here for a while without making additional purchases. I bought tea and a scone less than an hour ago. And I've been sitting quietly the entire time. What's the actual issue here?" His face flushed. "The issue is that you need to leave." Something cold settled in my chest. I'd been a black woman in America for 43 years. I knew exactly what this was. I'd experienced versions of it my entire life. But it still stung every single time. "Let me be clear," I said slowly. "I'm a paying customer. I purchased items from your cafe. I'm sitting quietly in a public area of your store. I haven't disturbed anyone. And you're asking me to leave. Is that correct?" "That's correct." "And can you articulate a legitimate business reason for this request?" "I don't have to explain myself to you. Actually, you do. This is a public accommodation. If you're asking me to leave, you need to have a legitimate, non-discriminatory reason. So I'm asking again, what's the reason?" Garrett's hands clenched at his sides. "Are you refusing to leave? I'm asking you to explain why you're singling me out when there are dozens of other customers who've been here just as long or longer. If you don't leave voluntarily, I'll have to call the police." My heart was pounding now, but my voice stayed level. "Then I guess you need to call the police. Because I'm not leaving until someone can explain what policy I've violated." Garrett pulled out his phone and walked a few feet away. I couldn't hear the entire conversation, but I caught enough. "Riverside Books and Cafe on Northwest 13th. We have a customer who's refusing to leave. She's being confrontational and making people uncomfortable. Can you send someone?" He ended the call and walked back toward the counter without looking at me again. I sat there, processing what had just happened. Part of me wanted to leave. To avoid the confrontation that was coming. To protect myself from whatever was about to unfold. But another part of me, the part that had spent 19 years fighting for justice, refusing to let fear dictate my actions, knew I had to stay. This was wrong. And walking away wouldn't change that. It would just confirm that this manager could treat people this way without consequences. I picked up my tablet and continued reading. But my hands were shaking. 12 minutes later, I heard the familiar sound of a radio crackling. I looked up and saw him. A police officer in full uniform, walking through the front entrance. White male, probably mid-30s, muscular build, with a squared jaw and cold blue eyes. His hand rested on his duty belt as he walked, not threatening exactly, but ready. His name tag read Preston. Officer Marcus Preston had been with the Portland Police Bureau for 9 years. I would learn later that his record included 14 complaints. 14. Most of them involved allegations of excessive force or discriminatory treatment toward people of color. Only 2 had been sustained, resulting in brief suspensions and mandatory retraining. The rest had been dismissed with findings of no violation or insufficient evidence, despite witness testimony and documented patterns. Preston walked directly to where Garrett was waiting near the cafe counter. They spoke briefly. Garrett pointed at me. Preston's gaze followed the gesture, and his expression hardened. He approached my chair with the aggressive swagger of someone who'd already decided I was a problem. "Ma'am, you need to come with me." I looked up at him. "Officer, I'm a paying customer sitting in a public bookstore. I haven't violated any laws or store policies. The manager says you're refusing to leave. That makes this trespassing." The manager asked me to leave without providing any legitimate reason. I asked him to explain what policy I'd violated. He couldn't. So I'm still waiting for an explanation. I don't need an explanation. He wants you gone, so you're gone. Stand up. My training kicked in. Document everything. Stay calm. Make sure this is on record. Officer, before this goes any further, I need you to know that I'm a federal agent. DEA Special Agent Tasha Wilmont. My credentials are in my bag. I'm happy to show them to you. Preston's expression didn't change. Stand up and show me some ID. Of course. I reached slowly for my bag, keeping my movements visible and deliberate. I pulled out my DEA credentials, the official identification card in its black leather case with the gold badge. I opened it and held it up so he could see clearly. Here. DEA credentials. Special Agent Tasha Wilmont, 19 years of service. Preston took the credentials from my hand. He examined them for maybe 5 seconds. Then he handed them back to me. Anyone can buy a fake badge online. Stand up and put your hands behind your back. The air seemed to leave my lungs. Excuse me? You're under arrest for trespassing. Officer Preston, those credentials are real. You can verify them with one phone call to the Portland DEA field office. The number is on the card. I'm asking you to make that call before this escalates. I'm not calling anyone. You're trespassing. You've been asked to leave by the property manager. You're refusing. That's a crime. Now stand up. The bookstore had gone quiet. Conversations stopped. People turned to stare. I saw phones coming out, angling toward us. Someone was recording. Multiple people were recording. Good. I wanted this documented. Officer Preston, I'm going to comply. But I want everyone here to understand what's happening. I'm a federal DEA agent. I showed this officer my official credentials. He's claiming they're fake without attempting to verify them. I'm being arrested for sitting in a bookstore while black. Everyone who's recording this, please keep recording. This matters. Preston grabbed my arm roughly. Hands behind your back. Now. I stood slowly, setting my tablet on the chair. I turned and placed my hands behind my back. The metal handcuffs clicked around my wrists, tight enough to be uncomfortable. Deliberately tight. You're under arrest for criminal trespass. I'm not trespassing. I'm a paying customer. Tell it to the judge. A woman's voice called out from somewhere nearby. This is wrong. She wasn't doing anything. She was just sitting there reading. Another voice. She showed you her badge. Why aren't you checking if it's real? Preston ignored them. He marched me toward the front entrance, his grip on my arm unnecessarily firm. As we passed the counter, I saw Garrett watching. His expression was unreadable, but he didn't look away. Outside, the cold air hit my face. The holiday decorations that had seemed cheerful earlier now felt mocking. Preston guided me toward his patrol car parked at the curb. I could see his body camera mounted on his chest. Everything was being recorded. Everything would be evidence. Officer Preston, I said clearly, making sure the body camera caught every word. You are arresting a federal agent without probable cause. You refuse to verify my credentials despite my repeated requests. You are using unnecessary force. This is being recorded by multiple witnesses and by your own body camera. This will end your career and cost your department a substantial settlement. I'm giving you one more opportunity to verify my identity before we continue. Preston opened the back door of his patrol car. Get in. I complied. The back seat was hard plastic, designed to be easily cleaned. It smelled like disinfectant and something else, something human and desperate. The smell of everyone who'd sat here before me. Preston got in the driver's seat and started the engine. As we pulled away from the curb, I looked back at the bookstore. A small crowd had gathered outside. At least a dozen people with phones raised, recording. The story was already spreading. I could see it happening. The drive to the precinct took 14 minutes. Neither of us spoke. I used the time to document everything mentally. Times. Statements. Actions. Witnesses. I'd testified in federal court dozens of times. I knew how to build an airtight case. And this case was building itself. We arrived at the central precinct building. Preston walked me inside through the side entrance, still handcuffed, past a desk where a female sergeant looked up with immediate concern. Preston, what've you got? Trespassing at Riverside Books. Subject refused to leave when requested by the manager. The sergeant stood up. She was black, probably in her late 40s, with sharp eyes that missed nothing. Her name tag read Williams. Did she resist? She refused to comply with lawful orders from both the manager and myself. I spoke up. Sergeant Williams, my name is Special Agent Tasha Wilmont, DEA. I was sitting in a bookstore having tea. The manager asked me to leave without providing any legitimate reason. I identified myself as a federal agent and showed Officer Preston my credentials. He dismissed them as fake without attempting to verify them and arrested me. I complied fully. There was no resistance whatsoever. And this entire incident is being recorded by multiple civilian witnesses and by Officer Preston's body camera. Sergeant Williams's expression went very still. She showed you federal credentials? Preston pulled my credentials from his pocket and tossed them on the desk. Claims they're DEA. Williams picked them up carefully. She examined the badge. The identification card. The holographic seal. The microprinting along the edges. The weight and texture of the materials. She'd clearly seen enough federal credentials to recognize the real thing. Preston, these are legitimate. Could be good fakes. They're not fakes. Williams looked at me. Ma'am, what's your badge number? I recited it from memory, along with the direct number for the Portland DEA field office. Williams picked up the phone on her desk. The call took less than 3 minutes. I could hear her side of the conversation clearly. Confirming my identity. Verifying my active status. Apologizing repeatedly. When she hung up, her face had gone hard. She looked at Preston with an expression that could have frozen water. You arrested an active DEA agent for sitting in a bookstore. The manager called. She refused to leave. You verify federal credentials before you arrest. That's basic procedure. That's day one academy stuff. Take those cuffs off her right now. Preston unlocked the handcuffs. My wrists ached. Deep red marks were visible where the metal had pressed into my skin. I rubbed them slowly, making sure Williams saw. A lieutenant arrived within minutes. Daniel Cross, a white male in his 50s with tired eyes and 28 years on the job. He listened to Williams's briefing, his expression growing darker with each word. When she finished, he turned to me. Agent Wilmont, I apologize on behalf of the Portland Police Bureau. This should never have happened. I nodded but said nothing. I was done talking. Now I was documenting. Every word would matter in the lawsuit I was already constructing in my mind. Lieutenant Cross turned to Preston. Badge and weapon. You're on administrative leave effective immediately. Lieutenant, I was responding to a manager's complaint. You arrested a federal agent for drinking tea. Give me your badge. Preston's hands were shaking as he handed over his badge and service weapon. For the first time, he seemed to understand the magnitude of what he'd done. Within 3 hours, the videos exploded online. Multiple angles from different witnesses in the bookstore. Me identifying myself. Showing my badge. Being handcuffed and marched out like a criminal. The hashtag started trending immediately. Federal agent arrested while reading. DEA agent handcuffed in bookstore for making customers uncomfortable. Arrested for reading while black. The outrage was immediate and widespread. The DEA issued a formal statement condemning the arrest and demanding a full investigation. Civil rights organizations called for accountability. The mayor's office issued a carefully worded apology. The Portland Police Bureau announced an internal review. Garrett, the manager who'd made the initial call, gave one statement to local media. I thought she was loitering. I didn't realize she was a federal agent. He was fired within 48 hours. Riverside Books issued a public apology and announced new anti-discrimination training for all staff. But the damage was done. The video showed everything. A black woman, professionally dressed, quietly reading, showing federal credentials, being arrested anyway. Civil rights attorneys contacted me within hours. This wasn't just a wrongful arrest. This was racial profiling with video evidence. This was a federal agent being treated like a criminal because of her skin color. This was proof that even a DEA badge wasn't enough protection against bias. The lawsuit named Officer Marcus Preston, Sergeant Williams for failure to supervise despite Preston's documented history, Lieutenant Cross for the same reason, Garrett the manager, Riverside Books and Cafe, and the City of Portland. The claims were extensive. Unlawful arrest without probable cause. False imprisonment. Violation of federal civil rights under Section 1983. Racial profiling and discrimination. Excessive use of force through unnecessarily tight handcuffs and rough handling. Intentional infliction of emotional distress. Failure to verify credentials despite repeated requests. Municipal liability for failure to train and supervise officers with documented patterns of discriminatory conduct. The city's attorneys reviewed the evidence. The videos from multiple angles. The body camera footage. The witness statements. The recordings of the 911 call and radio dispatch. Preston's history of complaints. The clear demonstration of credentials and Preston's refusal to verify them. Their conclusion was unanimous. Indefensible. The city settled within 11 months. $4.8 million paid to me personally. Riverside Books contributed an additional $900,000 from their liability insurance. Garrett, as an individual defendant, settled for an undisclosed amount from his personal assets. Officer Marcus Preston was terminated 13 weeks after the incident. The termination letter was final and damning. It cited the unlawful arrest, refusal to verify federal credentials, excessive use of force, and pattern of discriminatory policing evidenced by 14 previous complaints. His name was entered into the National Decertification Database. His law enforcement career was over at 34 years old. But his termination was just the beginning of the consequences. The Department of Justice Civil Rights Division opened a pattern and practice investigation into the Portland Police Bureau. They wanted to understand how an officer with 14 complaints, multiple sustained findings, and documented evidence of bias had remained on active duty. The investigation took 18 months. They reviewed 10 years of data. Thousands of arrest reports. Hundreds of use of force incidents. Civilian complaints. Internal affairs investigations. Training records. Supervisor evaluations. Their findings were released in a 137-page report. The data showed clear patterns of racial disparities in stops, searches, arrests, and use of force. Black residents were stopped at rates 3.4 times higher than white residents, even after controlling for crime rates and neighborhood demographics. They were searched at rates 4.1 times higher, despite being less likely to be found with contraband. Use of force incidents against black subjects occurred at rates nearly 5 times higher than against white subjects in comparable situations. The report found systemic failures in supervision, training, accountability, and oversight. Officers with multiple complaints received inadequate scrutiny. Internal investigations were cursory and biased toward exoneration. Training on implicit bias and constitutional policing was perfunctory and unassessed. Early warning systems existed but were ignored. The Portland Police Bureau entered into a federal consent decree. The mandated reforms were comprehensive. Immediate administrative leave for any officer with 6 or more complaints related to discrimination or excessive force. Mandatory verification of all federal, state, and local law enforcement credentials before any arrest. Real-time body camera review by supervisors for all arrests and use of force incidents. Independent Civilian Oversight Board with subpoena power and authority to recommend discipline. Quarterly statistical analysis of all stops, searches, and arrests, with automatic investigation of any statistically significant racial disparities. Federal monitoring for 5 years minimum, with the possibility of extension if compliance benchmarks weren't met. I testified at city council hearings about the incident. My testimony was measured and powerful. I'm a federal agent with 19 years of experience investigating drug trafficking organizations. I've worked undercover in situations where one wrong word could have gotten me killed. I've testified in federal court against some of the most dangerous criminals in this country. And I was arrested for sitting in a bookstore reading case files. I paused to let that sink in. I wasn't loitering. I was a paying customer. I wasn't causing a disturbance. I was sitting quietly. I wasn't making anyone uncomfortable, except apparently a manager who couldn't accept that a black woman in his bookstore might actually belong there. Another pause. This happens every day to black people who don't have DEA badges. To people who don't have the resources to hire attorneys and fight back. To people whose arrests don't generate viral videos and national attention. If this can happen to me, with all my credentials and institutional backing, what happens to everyone else? The room was silent. Several council members were visibly moved. The testimony became part of the public record, cited in the DOJ report and referenced in subsequent policy discussions. I donated the entire settlement to 3 organizations. The first was a legal defense fund for people of color who'd experienced discriminatory treatment by law enforcement but lacked resources to pursue justice. The second was a scholarship program for minority students pursuing careers in law enforcement and criminal justice. The third was a police accountability organization that trained communities on their rights and how to document interactions with law enforcement. I don't need the money, I told reporters. I have a good salary and a pension. What I need is for this to mean something. I need this incident to create change that protects people who don't have what I have. The bookstore footage became required viewing at police academies throughout Oregon. It was used in law school courses on civil rights litigation. Civil rights organizations used it in community education programs about documenting police interactions and knowing your rights. Marcus Preston never worked in law enforcement again. His termination and decertification made him unemployable to any legitimate agency. He tried private security but couldn't maintain employment once his history became known. He eventually left Oregon. He gave one interview, claiming he'd followed his training and that I'd been uncooperative. The interviewer asked him why he hadn't verified my credentials. Preston claimed he'd had concerns about authenticity. The interviewer asked him what specific concerns. Preston couldn't articulate any. Garrett gave no further statements. He deleted his social media accounts after receiving threats. Riverside Books underwent significant changes. New ownership. New management. Comprehensive anti-bias training for all employees. A formal policy prohibiting calls to law enforcement except in cases of actual criminal behavior, threats, or violence. I stayed with the DEA. I continued my work investigating drug trafficking organizations. But colleagues say the experience changed me. Made me more outspoken about racial bias in law enforcement. More willing to mentor young agents of color and prepare them for the reality that their credentials wouldn't always protect them. In presentations at law enforcement conferences, I talk openly about what happened. I show the data from the DOJ investigation. I explain how bias operates in split-second decision-making. How it affects not just civilians but fellow law enforcement officers. How institutions must actively identify and eliminate discriminatory practices rather than waiting for catastrophic failures. The incident became part of my permanent record in an unexpected way. The DEA uses it in training for new agents. Not to embarrass me, but to illustrate how racial bias can affect even federal agents and why we must be vigilant about our own biases when we encounter people in the field. What happened to me wasn't unique. It was just documented. It was just viral. It was just high profile enough that it couldn't be ignored or dismissed. Thousands of Black Americans experience similar treatment regularly. But they don't have federal credentials. They don't have institutional backing. They don't have the resources to fight back. Their arrests don't make national news. Their stories don't force consent decrees and systemic reform. That's why I insisted the footage remain public. That's why I donated the settlement. That's why I continue speaking about it years later. So it becomes more than just my story. So it becomes a catalyst for awareness, for accountability, for change. The marked police car still patrols the streets of Portland. Officers still respond to calls about suspicious people in coffee shops and bookstores. Managers still make judgments about who belongs and who doesn't. But now there's body cameras. Now there's statistical analysis. Now there's civilian oversight. Now there's federal monitoring. Now there's consequences. Is it enough? No. Systems don't change overnight. Bias doesn't disappear because of one lawsuit or one consent decree. But it's something. It's pressure. It's accountability. It's proof that even when the system fails, it can be forced to respond. Preston's career is over. That's justice. The city paid millions. That's accountability. The DOJ forced systemic reform. That's progress. But money and policy changes don't undo the trauma of being handcuffed in front of 50 strangers. They don't restore the dignity of being treated like a criminal while showing a federal badge. They don't erase the message that even credentials and authority aren't always enough to protect you from bias. The real question is what changes next. Do other cities learn from Portland's expensive mistake? Do other officers think twice before dismissing credentials they don't want to believe? Do other managers recognize their bias before reaching for the phone? Because if we don't apply these lessons beyond one incident, one officer, one city, then we're just waiting for the next video. The next viral hashtag. The next federal agent sitting in the wrong bookstore at the wrong time with the wrong skin color. Should businesses face mandatory federal review and financial penalties for racially motivated law enforcement calls? Thanks for watching. Do remember to hit the subscribe button, like and share this story, and I'll see you in the next one.